on now, so have fun, y'all.
See ya.
Have fun, Shannon, Jack, and everyone else. Denise is going to the bathroom.
Look, we're good. Thank you.
Peter, can you get him?
Yeah. What the heck? I don't.
No beer.
Has the game started?
It doesn't start until 3.
So there's another hour.
We'll be okay. This is a bit already with enough time for me to give a decision, watch the interview, and write comments, so it's fine.
There's a TV in the middle room. I'm sure you can get like Clark to try.
That's okay. Y'all are more important than the basketball game. I'll survive.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave
I'm
at 2
talking about
o'clock
after.
and watch the basketball game in there, and I'll just stream the debate. I mean, that's an option, right? So I can flow from the
Because I
stream, it'll be
really
fine.
want both parties mutually want to decide this.
I'd rather be watching the basketball game.
Are you judging round 4?
No.
Oh, nice.
But we split a commitment, so we only have to judge your comments.
I totally forgot round 4 was today. And when I heard it was, it just like devastated me.
We have a round 4 today. Oh, it's
I think everyone's kind of out of it because it's like post regular season, post season. We're kind of like in it though. I don't know if anyone actually did that much prep for this tournament.
How much time, what time does like the round 4 end?
6-ish, right? I mean, they've been doing maybe 2 hours, so it's gonna start at 4, so. in that 5:30.
See, that's why I like this. I was really upset at the beginning. I was like, y'all are having me wake up at 5 in the morning.
Is the 1AC even done?
Yeah, someone, you got it.
Oh, I got it. It would help if I opened the document. I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I got it.
What is this, the big one?
In the
process of spatialized segregation, surveillance, policing, black geographical subjectivities, race codifying race literature, recreate the plantation ecology, express black mention, choice relations of black communities only emerge from histories and deconstruct narratives, landscapes, right 21 black, or this media by resident environment, resident volunteer, capture by language, choice relations of black community, remedy service, society, black conservation, environment, bonds, coded by research, black geographies, emerging racial relations, spatial segregation, surveillance, over police, practice, including black communities, and our police, black people, or race, even especially which have been historical, socially, violence, on the career, more so, promoted to the shaping black, violence, of shift over something, but no, was created throughout the experience, so that back, resource, subways, speaking of variety, racial, including ecology, and violence, the connected land, environment, black cultural, to demonstrate that the possibility, fungibility, backlash, interest, starting about many response to ecology, the produce, API, ecology, the recurrent analysis, search, bias, and ecology, making known as seemingly separate landscape, environment, about following social events, the recurring political paradigm management of colonial landscapes and actions on a nation designed to maintain the captivity, slavery, control, predictable, and fungible black fugitivity, emerges that fungibility as a cognitive picture, a possibility that equip black imagination under the conditions of the whole K-19 whole colonial landscape, dynamic, capability, and ability, so the biggest order, they never is a total flow of our property, agency, matters of reflection, white side of the domination, black body, products being managed, that slave could be operated from the figures on the landscape, unpredictable movement, black bodies, black fugitivity, and sorry, moving God, state, unpredictable, by Gil, sorry, was impossible to contain one imagination on every strategy, capturing black and spongibles, way of having anticipated by movement, the technology representation, every class development, and having discipline, rebel, and the generic working class card, argued by the dangerous specials, and the unpredictable, floating back, rebellion, the structural against all power of the few black futures, representing them as fungible, more than representing the voting money, fungibility, manifestation, one excited back fugitivity, emergence, opportunity, fugitivity as a kind of material possibility, there's evidence of black engineering and vision on the conditions, the whole these logics is aspect of unique degradation, intoxication, black geopolitical landscapes, the form of racial exploitation, romantic flow, urbanization, pastoral agriculture, acceptance, transfer, degradation, and culture, which and the word backward concussing communities of absolute reference nation that black communities that were laying recreation through the housing and warfare chokes, sedimentation, poison by concentration, fuel by water pack that the growth is over general concentrating, concentrating, economic, social marginality of people, same marginal facilities, urbanization give rise to concentrated, endangering healthy cabbage, illustrating the intertwined nature of ecology, human geographies, including appears as slavery, at least to shape the region through shaping principle of domination, exploitation, development, private regions, water, resource, ideology, dominating, grant, ownership, class, and the prerogative, transfer, wilderness, and entry, plantation, industrial government, mastery, at the exhaustion of water system, vulnerable population, planners, forced slaves to transfer, the interface of water land through the construction and displacement of forced by diversity, panic, cash out of these transformations out of various social leadership environments, transformation epidemics, communities suffered, the malnourished laborers are forced to transform lands by filling songs and descendant of the slave communities, continuing inherent vulnerable, toxic land and water saves the culmination in history and stewardship of the toxification, one exposure involvement of these communities continue to self-fashion the individuals collective black male culture, reflects the ongoing legacy of the local communities efforts self-creation resistance, carry the intimacy and knowledge of waterways, now opaque and opaque and shy space in the communities, cultivating the plantation landscape, the apart from the subject object relation that adhere to primary grammar master the intricate and black social life and landscape water and land water safety limit the expression these practices about the legacy of competing social challenging and collision the practice of blooding the enslaved black communities create possibilities for connection surging renegotiating landscape activity domination black communities emerge from that engagement with the practice of placing outside configuration land and water register the action and site to challenge that infrastructure modification social needs of at least institutional recognition of black communities harms a promotion with the resettlement remains by political paradigms McClure Milligan 18 despite institutional recognition structures psychological community disorders of inner communities environmental institutional considerations of black communities well-being reducing interesting and operating and normalized operating relation wise and cycle of the histories of black indigenous justice and realism government proceedings to for the Roman black neighbors actually covered by the relation development on a relation largely absent consideration of response to produce lighter particular racial environment disparity between counted open and spending higher as and possibility relation beyond that settlement point was racial was impulsive equation justice must be recognition difference must be rejected the racial justice community and ignition under the forms which form different rather than legible ability useful categories are in racial bodies in the subject colonial landscape the racial categories of the national high degrees of offer recognition reach as white authority realize the racial marginalized people the recognition suppress the strong distortion meaning mobilization black indigenous communities obscuring the reply relationship the translation of black indigenous political articulation and state religion the only ethical wastewater toxic damage produce racial disparity such as black and resident north and exposure to recognizes EJ communities through the regulatory process the however, the institutionalization usually shows the gender reproduced language between and environment and environments of racial body organisms. So, I've seen the APS refusal demands focus on remediation, distorting the impact communities while offering inclusions to gender appropriation, each issues rather than seeking recognition, each community refocus on celebrating ecology, immersion, between the efforts that persist by impacts grouping and offering that community shows despite hazards and warnings against civil disobedience, the criminal government attack, not just recognized. Thus, we embrace fusion, marine landscapes, social motive, rivalry, efforts to the social political system that thrive like that environmental exploitation, marine landscapes, rivalry, efforts to the most spatial capture, control black quality, gender waste, to show some release through the process of refusal and saving can explore temporal geographies through the modes of flight, escaping the spots necessary during plantation economies done about 20 enslaved Africans, economic incomes, and visionary government, social builders, outside the colonial river, government, and settlements offer the alternative states of actual and freedom of the whole communities that make life they more related to unruly geographies and environments into Washington, to unruly powers, and lucky incentives, kind of solve cultivate land, wasteful shows that release your foundation, black and wastefulness, and fear people, and then Africans about the alternative geographies of emergency seasons, less issue of movement ability through escapes and for the new geographies, compelling, controlling movement and subject of process for having the restriction of mobility is propagated, then 7th of the social order, the 7th shift plantation, colonial landscapes, and legal customers for passing identification, some of those guard with and also not damaging, attempting to control black mobility, facility and operation desire to maintain the plantation companies because of mobility, shifting discussions, and second landscape of the dynamic process of the flight movement through colonial nerve landscape, the act of refusing partial landscapes and logic instead of the act, etc. Occupied ravaged areas and ways and use plantations, other space, government planners, ideas and social space, includes not in the space of conscious movement, but the space determines how stable or is in manner which instead Africans are able to afford themselves mobility, the ravaged areas, or to need space for private and public creative expression, rest and recreational communication, resistance, plaintiffs, domination, sex, urban discussion, movement, landscapes, and geography, self-development, land, land, paradise, marine, public, and mobility, maritime, sea, ships, find the notions of urban mobility, peace, finding the placing back fuels within the most wanting use sharpers, where the media are from limit or kind of movement, nations, actually, the historic archaeology, trying to identify second movements in most space location, geography, our dynamic names, of the parts of movement, making merge back in the historic and geographical context, which experiences event, largest space, social, black, and landing, living this force of the explanation, or how, black, and resistance, makes way to the deep absent or death, refusal, absence, and death, these are lots of critically found by the harmony life from severing the skills of ocean and letters, so they carry them, fugitivity embodies the positive black imagination, the access phenomenological terminology of black movement and desirability for resistance, someone else, K18, the opinion reflects the demographic present, desire to manifest in the low frequency, that not to resist, but to escape a state of desire, just the global constellation, fugitivity, skills of movement, and another located figures dealing with imagination, possible phenomenological structure of movement, desire, black creativeness, as a future avoidance of the dream, also when they see some paramount civils, rights and political emancipation by expression, putting in acts, label, expressing the like the strength of the interventional law, marks, and a statement of environment, perception, intelligence, and process, warning the form of fugitive escape from historical crisis of racial surveillance.
Yeah.
Fugitive practices of rejection of rules, enforcement, and interpretation of all debate that releases essential black survival in space and question of authority inherent in the heuristic governance of space and vote after you think we break the rules. Bay 19 fugitive reference only fugitive marks just game of partition image. I mean the pervasive and enforcing fundamental being is an oppressive violation of fugitive relation been captured in the non-consistent fugitive rules of law to the movement and the life is garnered the state or highlight their ultimate legitimacy as rules can always be broken. You can see cast on those undermine system make rules mobilize with that service of the deviant necessary of ethical sociality balance inside of racial liberation DSRB ballot is the most given tools and influence awareness to community teams in response to the trends of the community's all diversity from the outside to devise discussion, non-gender free competition, organization, holding debate, accountable, fairly enforcing teams because there will not sure was engaged in result of environment hostile to difference.
You can actually Carter is it marked that environment or hostile to difference?
Environment hostile to difference. It's the end of the card. Antonio.
Sweet. So I'm gonna start cross. How does the 1AC depart from the status quo?
We endorse fugitive marinage as a theoretical practice for re-understanding how we interpret water protection and the way in which government orients itself to black communities and their water. We think that can then spill up to forms of praxis, i.e. resisting government structures.
So what what would you like the government to do?
Well, it's not a question of what the government can do, it's a question of what we do in the face of governmental violence.
That question is
Creative
what
elegant evidence.
So
Talks about why that framing of that question is ultimately problematic in the nature of that environmental justice is being co-opted in that process. The creative elegant evidence isolates in 1996 Atlanta kind of went through this very process where the EPA created an office in Atlanta that was attempted to or tried to resolve exploitation, but ultimately ended up resulting in an increase of exploitation because although
okay, so the 1AC's made a bunch of claims about why the EPA and the government have failed in the past. Why does that mean AFFs are bad, or calling for the government to do good things are bad?
Well,
it's
we have an
critique
argument
of
that
little recognition.
right. We have an argument that there's colonialist tendencies that are ultimately anti-black that undergird the possibility.
Why is telling the government to do good things anti-black?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a colonial tendencies that undergird the eco-managerialism and the process of managing and monitoring water systems. The King evidence in the 1AC talks about the plantation-based economies and gives the.
But we can agree that's all status quo descriptive, right? All the evidence that you've read in the 1AC is the government has done bad things in the past.
It's not a question of what contingent things that the government does. It's a question of the tendencies that produce exploitation in the first place. Our argument is that the literal exploitation is driven by a desire to exploit, a desire to racially degrade those environments, which is why we have specific.
What should our response to that be?
Response to what?
What should our response to governmental?
Why should I determine the way you respond to my? I'm confused.
What does the 1AC think we should do about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, each evidence that talks about exploitation isolates at the bottom of it what we do in the face of that. The Mercury evidence at the bottom isolates fugitivity as a rupture to that. Specifically, what the Atlanta citizens did in that moment was instead of kind of accepting the political exploitation that happened to them, they actually like went out onto the rivers that were blocked off, that were cautioned off, and they like kind of did like canoe tours and guided trips as a fugitive mode of rupture, political rupture to.
So in Atlanta, there were toxic contaminants in the water, right? And that was basically a result of like failed governmental policy. Like, why would the government eliminating pollution from the water be bad?
Our argument is that the government has no desire to eliminate.
But like, if they were to, would that be bad?
If they were to, it ultimately replicates
If
the.
they were to.
If they were to remove pollution from the water that people
The
drink, would that
problem
be
is
bad?
that very framing is what's used to.
Like yes or no, would that be bad?
That's the form
That's
of
the problem.
recognition
It's
that we
like
critique.
the yes or
How
no.
does the ballot solve?
Solution protocol we've impacted.
How does the ballot solve?
Balance
One,
on
if
what?
fugitivity is a good praxis in the face of anti-black violence, you vote Aff. Second,
But like, what does that do?
Second, the DSRB evidence says that it incentivizes things like research surrounding things like fugitivity.
So like
which is
accumulation of
obviously good.
ballots.
Third, it holds teams accountable for their failure to like actually engage black scholarship
Right.
and forces them to reflect on sustaining environment hostile to difference, which is a quote from the evidence.
Two off, case, spend some. Everyone got the doc?
No.
We're waiting on it.
Did everyone get the actual one here?
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We won't say it, right? We should-
I think Kyle just got it, but I still haven't. Let me quit upload. Yeah. Can someone?
No, you don't think?
No, I
Yes.
have. I don't know why I'm not getting it.
He just came in for me, so I
Okay.
mean, 10 seconds. Will be good.
All right. Let me. Okay. I'll mute.
First off, Suffolk County furnished to defend high implementation on topical plan. They dealt resolve proceeding on calling the case legislative form elsewhere. 81 and call separate the word resolved from the resolution resolved calling this committee to the favor of new legislation. The USFG generates the 3 branches to a single 16 USFG is 3 branches legislative, executive, judiciary, cards not signed to the FedR. To the state should recommends a course of action targeting 2K common. Meaning should recommends action protection is by government regulations circumvent. Intent protective means the regulated resource protection. The first regulation of activities protection is used the impulse to regulate related to protection. The impact is fairness. 3 internal links. 1 refutation. The resolution exists to maximize controversy, allocating equal ground staff in the negative, running to the moral high ground leaves the negative with indefensible positions, and reducing debate to invincible monologues. Second is shiftiness, proposing a specific course of action allows the negative to develop a coherent, consistent response, but nebulous absences like the one says sanction, sandbagging, and requalifications in the violent speeches deleting offense. 3 is predictability, post back to topic changes, wipes out negative preparation of staple generics with hinges on a vision of resolution formed by predictable definitions. It outweighs fair procedure to deliver value to the game. The tool for the ballot drives participation and without a chance to win, teams quit. Next up is the cap cake. The one sees homogenous theorization of black British and reflects the investment into fair rooted in the negative conception of identity. The horizon of this redactive politics is revenge, inflicting harm on the oppressor with no blueprint for collective liberation around it. The 95 politicized identity reiterates the importance of a substitute for action or reintegrates politics and rejection responsibilities rooted in substitution of ethics for to the deed's identity is a reaction to something outside a negative action is revenge through impossible assumption to suffer the production of guilt in privileged identity becomes invested in its own subjugation. Vested in identity politics is structured by various osmolar reversing without separating the structure as predicated on sustained rejection. Politicized identity seeks to generalize political failures is more likely to punish and reproach and to find self-referring politics. The furnace articulation of anti-racist politics fails to produce social transformation by weaponizing accused of past movements there as the justification for refusing the egalitarian promise of revolutionary transformation. Read in 17, anti-racism is not aligned with the egalitarian vision. Alternatives to rejects of the transformation, anti-racism fits within neoliberalism. The vision of a just society can be more aligned with the intergroup pluralism than revolutionary movements and new left's inclination to criticize socialism out of touch with the minority groups that capitalist societies and commitments to civic visions of social transformation. Left came to define a moral stance rather than strategic politics regarding racism. Left that give it to the radical social transformation pursuing of political power to retreats to the small side piece identity politics. Seen appearance to the left is not to retreat to the industrial unionism and social wage policies and industrial Black Americans' advancements. Failure to address the class and black politics undermine possibilities of black politics aligned with the new liberal ideas of social justice and the distribution of capital and benefits to the boundary of politically thinkable solidarity is the basis of how we trump solidarity and what we believe in-anti-racist politics mix of minds, radicalism, reformative emotions, but it's in racial and class attention to movements of immense and imposing a singular black aspiration to facilitate new liberal imperatives that anti-racism and more simply compatible neoliberalism and being full active components of ideological reproduction. Capitalism causes war, violence, and environmental destruction and extinction. Robinson, if foreseen crisis, sustainability, climate change, and cost of agricultural dynamic system is reaching its ecological limits, violence and controls for unprecedented computerized wars, drones, bombs, of vast population habits subject to control and destruction. This includes prisons, industrials, and immigration detention, competences of policing, militarized graduate gentrification, spread of WMDs. Militarism, homophobia, racism, 21st century fashion normalizes warfare. The alternative is a politics of organizing around common experience of life shaped by the political economy. The starting point creates a mode of solidarity that doesn't just add categories and stirs, but creates an inclusive class identity via struggles that transform participants. Pay attention. 18, the left's conundrum breaks into sufficiencies of identity. Politics focus on bringing people together around a common experience of life shaped up by the political economy. To the extent differences are real, the best way to negotiate them is from a shared purpose of solidarity based on injury to is of politics that can fashion a broadly inclusive class identity. The ontological mistake attributes too much to a text that fails to uncover what really accounts for limited developments of workers' capacity. The case page, political hope is good. Denying a racist black agency Maroons are an example of how political agency could be effective if it was directed in a different direction. Rescuing 20 equal participation is impossible in absence of efforts to change practice of organized political thinking institutions, the extension of individual attitudes, not abstractions. We are bound to reproduce aggressive habits if we do not engage by agency. African Americans can develop political participation as for the powers that be. Slaves assure freedom when they imagine themselves in terms not those of their master. African Americans have imagined ends independent from the fixed subjective, otherwise limited their agency disengagement from the structured domination such change to believe that circumstances can improve commits action to ameliorate problems rather than constituting a pre-existing structure of societies. We can figure to reproduce more inclusive formation. Each subject possesses the tools to reform the political world. That's especially true for black students. Community building alone denies debate about content, invaluable iteration of Rich Reagan. 84, the role of black studies is not to oppose ideologies, to expand consciousness in present action, not to foreclose the options, but to make all clear with a better understanding, help students discover between being patriotic and co-opted through a consistent interaction of radicals, liberals, and conservatives, and reactionaries. Of course, various motives of black studies should help prepare for that decision-making process. Fiat teaches empathy, perhaps in 12 trauma. It's not a alibi for voyeuristic invocations. It can understand exploitation as an active incentive to critique conditions. Trauma, based on phenomena, puts forth an alternate articulation of pain, draws its subject closer to the effective violence and more to the atmosphere of the pervaded by acts. Research can act as a catalyst for political activism to make visible the political rather than a pathology attachment to loss to create life worlds. A step to amelioration of precarious introduces normative equality to address basic needs. Engaging the state is historically successful. Denying that strengthens white supremacy. Kelly and 17, social formation restructured and also not define that we give white supremacy too much credit to treat. So regime concarnation state denies that these systems are distinct and responsive to the consideration regime. Jim Crow is a responsive black democratic upsurge after studying the gap between Reconstruction and Jim Crow years. Democratic struggle incarceration was the state's response to opposition. We think there's a structural white supremacy power became to anything white supremacy is fragile, weak, racial regimes shore themselves up using their unstable system gives impression so power is working overtime to respond to our opposition. Deferential epistemologies are worse for community formation, reifying trauma and actively strengthen hegemonic structures by marginalizing the people who were never here to defer to in the first place. Howard, 21 people say listen to the most effective is often meant to conversational authority calls for deference as a default open orientation to counter marginalized groups, interest in the least spaces. Same rooms have outsized influence by being in these rooms. It means being in a position to affect institution access is itself a social advantage. Individuals are most likely to be in the room because of the ways that they are systemically different from the people that they represent. Different certainly capture how much unjust arrangements. It's hard to believe to imagine how we could do worse as you are higher education and social the social experiences narrowed. Some students are pipeline to PhDs and others presence who ends up in the room shapes our world more powerfully, and the comprehensive prestige differential epistemology fail to solve those problems. Difference campaigns direct attention away from the system such treatment of elite interests of exchange as a racial economics relying on fantasies about exchange between attention and material economy. Perhaps a lucky few in winning one of the culture after we secure the bag. It is will eventually trickle down to the workers who clean up after our conferences, but probably not the differential approach for events centering the most marginalized. It focuses on the rooms we occupy rather than interactions that we can experience, misrepresenting the conflict such as appears as the center of the right topics have a coercive effects, especially when the community's norms have magnified these behaviors to provide cover for abdication of responsibility and to hypersanize a character culture. Deference may soothe short psychological wounds, but at this steep cost it can undermine epistemic goals of motivation, fighting for freedom rather than privilege, focus on civic goals rather than avoiding complicity or moral principles or pedestrians or of civilism. The true approach has to be accountable to the people who aren't yet in the room. Differential approach often comes in a package with the traumatic experiences I take seriously. Colonialism, racial slavery, and aftermath. I reflect on traumatic moments and very seldom think that was educational. Differential epistemology defines the entire people of their trauma for white audiences, not a card to play the battle of prestige.
Okay. Oh, you finished that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You good?
Yeah.
Alright, how do we qualify what a nebulous advocacy is
In what context?
on T?
Okay. The 1NC has made a claim that should requires a specific course of action via governmental policy. That way, the sort of arguments that we read in the 1NC will always be applicable to the plan because
Okay, what about
it has a stasis.
What about the app hasn't met a course of action?
So the 1AC cross-ex kind of determined that the 1AC hasn't presented a specific course of action, the specific material policies that people should take in the real world.
Why?
That means that one is
It's
like,
it's not like just meaning that word alone means you mean our interpretation. We define the resolution as a whole, which means the other words can contextualize it. So you have to take a specific course of action that is a regulation as per protection. It has to
If
be
debate
done
is
by
a
the three
game, are
branches.
there any material benefits to the activity?
Are there any material benefits? We think that if there are benefits, they exist when the game is fair.
Like
if
the
you
1C
think-
doesn't really take a stance on what we get from debate, but we all agree by being here, by depending on the judges to flow, by adhering to speech times, etc., that fairness is valuable. Like whether or not.
Valuable for whom and for what?
Sorry?
Valuable for whom and for what?
Well, we think a fair activity values everyone. Like, if there wasn't some sort of stasis about what prep was based off of, it would probably hurt, disenfranchised communities that don't have as much access to resources because they couldn't prepare.
But what about your enforcement of procedural fairness allows teams to get to tournaments?
I don't think we're enforcing procedural fairness. We think, as Shannon said, we've all agreed debate has some value. That's why we stopped speaking after 8 minutes. That's
Wait, what is that value? Because we were asking before, what is the value of debate? And you're just
Well, it literally doesn't matter what the value of debate is. Everyone comes to
So then why
debate
is
for,
fairness
can I
important?
finish? Everyone comes to debate for different reasons. The fact that we're all in this round, the fact that we all made it to this room, the fact that we expect the judges to flow, and the fact that dropped arguments are true, all kind of prove
So
that
all
the way
values
we,
of the game hinges on competition. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, fair competition.
How can capitalist accumulation explain things like slaves being dumped overboard?
Yeah, we can analyze slavery through a historical materialist lens and see that people that own slaves were extracting surplus value. And
I'm not asking about how capitalism can explain slavery. I'm asking about specific forms of violence. Why can capitalism explain things like slaves?
Give me an example.
Slaves being dumped overboard the zone.
Yeah, as I was explaining, there's a really good Ferrari card that was in case page that we could read in the block if this becomes relevant, but that card's historically slavery emerged because there was already a market in Africa going to the east. Slaves acquired immunity, so they were more valuable commodity than Europeans. It's much worse to enslave your own population. These are all things that capitalists made decisions wise to maximize their profit.
What's the last part you read?
The last part I read on the case was the deferential epistemology.
Just what I thought.
So the bottom part.
I just sent the cards.
Do you want me to put the cards that were in the 1AC, the extra ones on T, or do you want them on Ks? Okay.
You need brothers.
I think mine's right there. Never mind.
If they're already just got you.
Okay. There you go. Case framer cap. Has everyone got the document?
Do you listen to music while you spread?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Whatever works for it.
You get like a rhythm.
Yeah. So I just always go to A Lot by 21 Savage or FN by Lil J. So
Same tempo every time?
yeah.
Yeah.
You got it.
Alright, we're good, I think.
All right. Anyone not good, just stop me in the next couple seconds. Yeah.
Debates surrounding water governance and resisting the cultural control of aquatic landscapes, the move to protect water through the management control of nature, excuse the racial causes of track blackness and environmental terror, fugitivity, establishment of racial eruptions of the racialized logical colonial landscape that dominates spaces thought the underground eco-individualist tendencies that saw rescue from the black settlers in Florida who protected the Everglades to the Great Dismal Swamp of the Submitted River, black fugitivity embodies the geographic politics of opacity that protects surrounding ecologies of black people. That's due upon several impacts that outweigh all their offense. One is slow death. Atlantic space economies of black dehydration accelerate slow death from most survivors that produce disastrous conditions of black communities. So that's right. Second, eco-individualism, modern management of water quality, and racialized communities perpetuates value system that pathologize black spaces that creates bonds and degradation of water systems like Potomac and Anacostia River. That's where three is black fungibility, the containment of black movement synthetic geographies creates possibility for neurological antibodies, the movability of black flesh sustained white liberal king framing. We should all these outweigh the procedural question because the question of the ways in which they materially affect black life and it's impossibility to resolve through any topical form of planned action that's been criminal in the million evidence. The line of Rasmussen, we are not for press political agency is true and possible. Historically, it has been weaponized by the state of violently inclusive paradigm to exploit black life and management. We have endorsed re-understanding of water protection, not as government as a totality necessarily. Drake evidence can be easily debate about content, which will be proven out forever when they disavow for that crap. It's not at all true because the decenters a debate on the 2-second plan text. It says only we see the action of the plan which can't challenge the epistemological language, however you realize with Kelly evidence. A, we don't treat all systems of oppression as totality as white supremacy. It's infixed. We are an ontology. B, white transcripts condition. This emphasis comes from a video online without the consent of Robert G. Kelly or any of the other black thinkers on Plano by a white debate coach. It shows the way black scholarship has been funded on other models. The reason they should lose, especially when they're using this emphasis as the basis of why its mind should be given priority completely on context of its black Marxist roots. C is ahistorical. Jim Crow did not come about because of black Democratic Party gains. If segregation occurred before, during, and after black electoral political gains. It's not 25 years Democratic possibility. So 75 years of informal members of white terrorist organizations. Taiwan weapons, we don't defer responsibility. We have endorsed a mechanism of resistance proven by McCurry. I believe it's the bottom of the talking about fugitivities and epistemic rupture to exploitation and colonialism framework. At the top, vote have to break the rules. The one who sees present church debates where the Western love and black and blue lines play with the nativity predominantly navigated by white people and colonial standards and terms and standards. As may have its aid of rules and modalities offer nature of the devil and national black people treating black stress and fugitivity. The opposite place making method produce the rest of the wild state interest that do not be. Political structures can't solve any of our office as unions can because their starting point is ultimately produced by a colonial desire that creates a possibility for political change that turns the TVA seconds. Black success is not an all-time low. Proven by this round robin only having one black participating, which proves their model has failed. The black community 3 interpretation debates in ecology refuse white space association space in favor of body literature. This barrage 20 white space of being on white service of the university black and political creativity race the doctrine of black race or cause consider body situation communication verbal choice the body space culture race framing of ecology profile social culture and this sounds like economic culture performances capital those ecological knowledge white gets reduced price of the space to being from the black side of the right protection joking black the black the track which we just started assessing the economies are showing the communication research looking toward African relational models realities all retention this realities the core purpose all research activity that benefits A is equal critical analysis only interface possibility for treating to reduce critical spaces for resolutional objects B ethical subjectivity or moral forces non-black people's ethically in front of each future space of black people's terms next the role of the judge to affirm future space of education that's colon war in 20 future safety children black people press level words in black concepts future state the only other black person what cost more the culture process outside of the future education space is possible for birth and resistance state decentralized traditional forecasts and racial confidence percent of life members different racial structures B case outweighs affirm future safety as a practice stealing resolution from white is non-black should not determine the rules of engagement from black players next is captivity just the maximization of predictable class perpetuates itself allocates equal ground over the neutral states of white comfortability to reduce carcerality of black people which turns the refutations upward next is framing A none of their tellings have a definitional basis you assume if you arbitrary and non-resolutional B view debate as the game incentivized to infinite regression unpredictable worst forms of debate proven by plant-based 26 preempting disaggregating my new after then kicking the affluent one to just go burning my turn shifting to seize natural limit solves not limit on argumentation and critical scholarship germane to the topic that can be leveraged in debate solves predictability next is permutation your interples oriented minus the USMG next is okay the one produce state centric discussion that reproduce co-option BG judicial politics for recognition that never resolve racial bond but ultimately creates worse exploitation next is transparency just that the move to make future tactics coherent like debate through their civics predictability limits leads to the crushing and movement building and resistance because it isolates the key shots revolutionaries will use prefer black opacity which prioritizes clash over orientations instead of specific actions because it's key and to link to how to education next is fungibility just that the models indebted to plantation-based economies of labor intellectual property and hyper-technical production of argumentation research and cutting of cars that reduces black folks to machines for debate was ultimately reproduce our fungibility offense next is fairness debate the procedural terms of debate are conditioned by structural and social life black theoretical practice debate and academia traditional forms of research and universal notions of fairness are racially coded to determine what procedures and norms are considered viable or acceptable legally disadvantages of black scholarship that's a set of trauma the rule 21 evidence during a crisis analysis procedure as well the procedure lose a fair outcome procedure notion just as realizing the frame of the ethical setting means however evidence associated with the knowledge between differences addressing the quality of the physical disadvantage black and white should be blind social human disease where a distorted notion of academia implementing the same rules apply to all systemically unlegal racial social causes unfortunately affects the already disadvantaged the reality of being essential assuming how policies apply to black communities and forward practice and only as an afterthought when the evidence shows a significant impact this notion of equity is silent to systemic race and perpetuating these extra structural violence towards black Americans second they can't solve their office no reason why voting next stops chaos from being read or prevents us from doing this further in other rounds Levy 3 is unfairness good for non-black players space content existence better internal link to solving dogma cap framework, our interpretation that you should weigh the affluent prayer preferred any other single laws of our term to include privileged unavailable positional competition, work peace, non-resolution theory is most reciprocal, which boosts black class engagement, voting next is non-resolving extinction. The Afro is black social life and spirituality provide value life permutation to each either the all can overcome the links of the Afro social problem that's called the link debate proper link term, which are officers necessary for black life to match sociality outside of the registered abandonment and worthlessness that racial capitalism codifies black people as. That's Winston 21. Rune geographies manifesting that geographically difficult terrain areas and untenable for inclusion plantation economy considered worthless according to the logic of capitalism carrying the rural ecology black people use as a critical basis for their flight from racial capitalism and enable revolutions beyond the confines of civilization. Some places hold a capacity generated ways of life to push against controlling racial capitalism. The brown evidence one is a violent configuration of our politics. Only the African adapted contingencies of black fanciful desires to the future advantage criminal policies and ethical rupture takes blackness as the one is the OSC. Next is its offense for us on framework that forces all black relationalities to be produced in a homogeneous manner at the level of form. Any impact is exacerbated by their own model. Next is permutation to both the net benefit of fugitivity. Black radical planning and action rejects the alternative static history in favor of politics refuses the generous black agency key internal into mass mobilization and race is necessary for class analysis. That's Sojourner 17. It's making connection between black fugitivity and political governance, pledges, economies, with representation, black fugitivity, static control, black radical planning and action fugitivity demonstrated through the engagement of facade, state power, liberal frameworks, through the refusal, set solution based on black radical action provides a path forward. The living experience of black people, their social paradigm, essential to contemporary capitalism, the black fugitivity based on the locus, means to the rock, or the envy, the liberal government, pass the fully grasp the limitation, liberal state project, like capitalism, globalization, incentivized hierarchies, the degree which subordinate people are able to exercise agency, being circumscribed by power structure, action taken by black people, search of agency within a social arrangement that makes subservience, modern blacks, provides means to grasp complexity relationship to refocus on presenting black radical action as a conclusion to the constraints of very capitalism, next extinction, one all as better calculus that assumes universal proximity to death that mystifies the mundane violence of anti-blackness and conditions the priority of the status quo. Solving extinction does not solve no material impact that harms black people. The status quo at the level of racial degradation. Next is racial ecology to accelerate black death, which makes extinction unavoidable because exploitation will spill internationally and globally. That's the right evidence. Next is K solves the K. Only the active vision world without capitalism through black relations and reunions that are void of economic benefits. The alternative one homogenization is that they're all subject that all race-focused strategies to trace off the ability to rupture capitalism and reproduce a class-race binary. This assumes was the difference, which makes the alternative A eternally parasitic towards different modes of study and sociality. B makes intersectionality impossible, so limiting the capacity for alternative solidity. Next, all can solve the case. Their historical, material, revolutionary tendencies assume our phenomenologies are forms of inaction or lack real purpose, which actively pathologize our black encounter with space and embodying the colonial trips that retrenches our impacts. That's the dual alignment. Next is mastery. Just have their vertical structures are indebted for logical mastery that assume domination and power that creates a differential value system of the people in the party and who deserves more recognition over others. Maintain status quo paradigms of liberally taming black people. That makes that proves their alternatives. Next is anti-black. If that doesn't count, the alternative accountability is that the leadership they produce is historically complicit in sexual racial violence, reject the unfair relationality and unjust reforms are organized. And that's the A18. My resignation of everything new leadership of the party is based on this attempt to defend this on conservative white administration, which the party is supposed to correct. The last I have seen race opportunities and reaction towards the conservative revolutionary movement that raised by black institutions, comrades that witness and leadership and blatant aggressive misogyny and party members that attempt to hide disputes and sweep it under the rug.
20 seconds. It's fine. I'm good.
Framework, this Warren card, what does it look like for fugitivity to occur in the educational space?
Well, this card is about prioritizing the safety of black people given the absolute nature of derelicts that black people face. We have 3 listed impacts on case.
So do we think debate should be a safe space for black people? Like,
Yes.
what does that mean?
Well, that means prioritizing cultural practices of solidarity. What does it mean for us to nod towards and accept and have some sort of reasonability towards like the
So is
black
it
people in
about
the space
being
that's
able
necessary?
to read the stuff you read, or is it about like getting the ballot?
It's about being. It's about the problem is like it's about like the way we should encounter black fugitive education and what does it mean for us to instead of like negating the possibility of refuge, like the negating clash with black scholarship. It's about like decentering what counts as knowledge in the first
You
place.
reading that to
I.e.,
violations
like,
of
So it's
safety
like
is a
if
lot
we
of our
went,
warrants
our
for adoption.
education's good, go to that.
Well, no, the Colin Warren evidence has a quote line that says they vigorously decenter traditional Eurocentric norms for what counts as knowledge. Argument is that your hermeneutics rely on this Eurocentric value system that says that black knowledge are unfruitful, unproductive, etc. We said that we should move away from those normative interpretations of what it means to engage in thinking towards other perspectives.
You said that the impact was critical analysis. What is critical analysis?
So I think you misunderstood. It was for the counter-interpretation. The net benefit was eco-critical analysis. Only our interpretation allows for an ecological reading of the resolution.
What is ecological?
An ecological reading of the resolution forefronts relationality towards the discussions that happen in the model of debates that we talked about. The problem is with your model is it doesn't do that. It rushes towards discussions of hegemony and crafting internal link chains towards extinction, but it does not forefront a protection of.
It's good to break rules. What rules have you broken, and why?
If we haven't broken rules,
why is it
then
going to
there's no
have
procedural
good to embrace breaking?
Well, we obviously, there's a double bind. Either A, we haven't broken any rules, which means that obviously you can just go to F on reasonability, or B, we have broken rules and that breaking is good. The Marquise Bay evidence
Why
that I
is
had
it
Kyle,
good to break rules?
yep, the Marquise Bay evidence that I had Kyle read in the 1AC was in context of fugitivity, and it says that, you know, when we break rules, when we shift away from the hegemonic normative modes of engagement, that is necessary, because even if those rules or procedural norms, etc., are innately good, the way they get deployed against black people are violent and anti-black.
So
And given the
what-
nature of like our
what is-
uniqueness claim at the
what
time,
is about
obviously you should.
Breaking rules? Why does that like?
Because
stop
our argument is that the
logic of rules
rupture,
being bad?
yes, our argument is that the, wait, what? Our argument is that the rupture is key towards a reorientation in how we imagine things like political discussions over water protection. I.e., we have an argument at the top of the case that's like there's an eco-managerialist tendency
That makes sense.
on
One
the
last
colonial
question.
landscapes that makes exploitation inevitable. We should
On the
shift away
K,
from those
the
modes of clash.
firm, the card's
Sure.
talking about black fugitivity would cause disengagement. Is it disengagement from capitalism? What are we disengaging?
It's a refusal of like the liberal modes of co-option. So like it's kind of in conversation with McCreary-Mill again, as we were talking before. Obviously the authors are not directly talking to each other, but it's like refusing for the environmental justice discourse to be co-opted, refusing for our politics to be co-opted, commoditized, and like kind of reduced. Our argument is that like fugitivity acts as the key medium for revolutionary tendencies because they allow us to kind of create these questions. Also, I think what's important about this card is it's specific to black youth. What does it mean for like youth discussions? What does it mean for us here as debaters, as youth, to kind of engage in these discussions? It's in context of LA and black fugitive in LA and revolutionizing against the anti-blackness that happened in those educational schooling districts in the region, and like what it meant for fugitivity then. They revolutionized those tendencies, which obviously proves that our education is necessary in a space like debate.
10 minutes. Which one's it? This one? That one. There's some extensions.
I'm trying to. I'm done. 7:15. Let me mute my computer because I'm getting notifications. For some reason, the volume button's not working. Okay, let's see. Ben Kings. There is one card. Vincent.
What was the order?
T and Kings.
Are there any cards?
One. It's in.
This is so dangerous. There looks sketchy.
Oh, it's dangling.
Is it really? Okay, okay, I got it.
that.
Yeah, I got you. Okay,
Is there a big overview on this?
Yeah.
First page?
there's like 15 seconds, right? Anyone not ready?
There was there?
One card.
Did you get it?
You said TKs.
Music.
Yep, sure.
For California. I'm not sure I'm not getting any emails.
Did you ever get a false return email? Like, did you type his email address in here?
Yeah.
No, you definitely did, because I got Jack's 1NC.
You said it was spam.
It's out there.
I can send it in, I don't really know how, we try sending it in a doc.
I can send it.
I don't know if these are going to
Is it in there?
Yeah, it looks pretty bad.
You
I don't know
can
why.
Discord it.
Yeah, I can Discord it.
Okay. Actually, never mind.
You got it?
Yeah, Kyler says.
Best be. You're not ready? Debate requires two sides. The neg must always disprove the app. Competitive incentives and necessity of negation both determine how each side approaches the round. Only our interpretation maintains procedural fairness by providing equal ground for the app. The neg teams prepare, maximizing competitive incentives to engage is key because the only reason either side continues to participate. This is not about the value of the subject of the debate, but the rules for each side. The impact is fairness. The fact that the affirmative expects you to flow, not inject your personal feelings and things hash out in other debates, and care about dropped arguments so that they too are invested in fair debates. Only maximizing fairness can translate the effort we all put into debate into an activity that everyone wants to participate in. Black teams breaking the rules. One, unfairness is worse. What happens when black people have to be neg against apps for an unfair interpretation of the topic? Your claims about structural unfairness are heightened in a world where under-resourced teams can't predict the apps will hit. 2, the ballot fails. All it does is say that either the app or the neg the debate of debating, which does not incentivize anyone to join. 3rd is counterproductive. If black people want to increase the black participation, then we should just give up on debating and give black people trophies. But at a certain point, debating the rules of the activity makes free handouts useless, and the activity becomes meaningless. There's no colonial desire. One, use the state to destroy the state. Would we be affirmed? Native withdrawals of metaphor. Teams use negative state action. Say the USFG should not human. 10, make commitments and say over the distractions, social movements, radical groups. Make commitments to not work with the state real legitimacy. Demands are made a position on certain political order. They question the legitimacy and even stop to the state by highlighting inconsistencies. 2, plan solve. Each time he says that the USFG should do something. It's not an endorsement of their agency, but a criticism of their inaction. New ideas allow debaters to investigate why the state is bad. 3, debaters aren't politicians. Advocating for a plan doesn't mean we enact that plan. Debaters don't go into politics, so there's no impact. 4, the state solves their offense. A Mercury evidence says that, quote, the EPA refused demands to eliminate pollution and to focus remediation on disparately impacted communities, which means calling on the USFG to take action and listen to impact communities. Demand solves. Descartes says the EPA is bad because it recognized problems with pollution but didn't do anything about it. A prime example of tokenization, but plans are different because they don't just stop at the recognition of problems but go further to attempt to solve them. Black participation, when it's unwarranted, card 0 indicate that black participation has decreased because you can't go for an argument that's purely anecdotal. 2, spurious correlation. For all we know, black participation could be dropping because camps are being read. Black people who like debate will debate whether they get to read plain less apps or not, and they can read it 50% of the time on the neg anyway. The 2AC makes an ecology metaphor. 1, the game disproves debate is not ecological, it's mechanical, driven by rules and norms, many of which you adhere to. The point of debate is opposition. If you talk about your feelings and we can't read T, then we're forced to negate your feelings, which is violent. 2, context is key. Mirage about white universities failing to combat racist posts on Facebook. That's inapplicable because the resolution doesn't mandate that apps tokenize black people or read apps with racist memes. 3rd, rules are good. Mirage makes a claim that blackness is supposed to force to operate on white people's terms. That's not what debate is, but rationally flipping the table and letting Berkeley prep pick the rules is a moral hazard for them to rig the game and complain that any criticism is whiteness. 4, switch sides here's the map who can be included, but rather which speed should include their advocacy, the 1NC or the 1AC. If that's white spatialization, they reduce the impact of triviality. The counter-interpretive deletes debatability. 1 is reputation. Acting for truisms like equality good or violence bad, which are uncontestable and uncontroversial, undermining the whole point of the res. That turns their impact running to the moral high ground, forcing negative to defend violent positions like racism bad as a generic. 2nd is shiftiness, waving fiat of plan text in favor of nebulous advocacy sex ground. Even apps that seem closer to the topic like theirs because it talks about water are no easier to negate because 1ACs don't forward a consistent vision of their arguments or what material actions to take. 3rd is predictability, or frame it through the conceded definitions. Our evidence outlines a predictable vision of the topic which all debaters can adequately prepare for. Only a predictable interp gets slower and targeted research prep which equalizes during live pretty fair debates. Your interp also links to your own offense by prescribing a specific mode of debate that is allowed for the fluidity. All of your evidence says is good. Turning debate into a critical space is unsustainable. 1, logically, if 2 teams both rely on the ballot to, quote, breathe, 1 team is basically ruptured since double wins aren't an option on tap. 2 is judge groups, the judge of the back blows badly or injects their personal opinions into the round. The ballot can't create the counter spaces they want. That proves the judge's decision is not a verdict of truth. Voting us up on T does not legitimize or delegitimize your advocacy. Feel free to keep reading this app. We just shouldn't lose because you did. That solves your offense. No ethical subjectivity. In fact, the ballot can't make us more ethical. This also is the answer to the ballot accumulation DSRB card from the 1AC. 1 is all causes are family, school curriculums, friends, religion, impact your subjectivities more. 2 is switch why we debate against arguments we read, proving any cognitive attachment to them. 3rd is lying teams read verifiably incorrect arguments like warm and good, knowing full well that those arguments are fake. 4th, several rounds happen simultaneously. It's logically impossible for the ballot to encourage adoption of unpredictable interpretations because each K team offers a different vision of the topic. There are three or more of them at this turn, which all present specific interpretations. Or voting of one interpretation can't inculcate it into the community. 5, drop arguments, treating them as true like the one error will ask you to do. Because the ballot is not a referendum on truth, it's a referendum on who debated better. 6 is blog upgrades. If we lose, we'll just upgrade their T blocks, not research your app or change or worldview. That defense is all applicable to the other offense on the flow and impacts on the 2AC on case. You roll the judge cast about the reference to the vendor debating. There is links to or offense. No captivity. Just had one T is procedural. You presented an argument negative shouldn't have to debate because it exceeds the scope of predictable research. Topic is not targeted at any specific literature base. We're reading T in this debate for the same reason we'd read T against a policy app that increases protection over oceans because the resolution told us we wouldn't have to debate it. Second, it's inevitable other T arguments reading and 10 case negative debating could all be considered forms of captivity. 3, read it on the neg. Our term doesn't preclude K's on the other side of the pairing. Or you can keep reading this 1AC on the app. Like we said, our term is exclusively based on the res. It tells affirmative teams to determine course of action which increases regulation of water resources, which tightens limits on the topic and solves offense. The game is good. They're voluntarily participating. That was above. They see quality seems juice up. That's also hard to debate. 1, it's wrong. App ground is limited with bad advantage, which can only access environmental impacts. 2, ground solves. Even if there are hundreds of small water protection apps, we still get competitive states in the agent counterplans and politics, federalism, BizCon, and agency trade-off this edge, which is more fair than your inter app germaneness when it's still undebatable. Even if the app mentions things about water, it still allows any agent to carry out the advocacy that links to none of our offense. Second, it's unpredictable. Even if there is ground against your app, it's unreasonable to expect a negative to cut every card in existence. We can't access the ground unless the debates are about the resolution. Third, it's uncontroversial. The resolution facilitates negative reputation. Theirs ensures a run to the margin where app literature is always favored against any ground we can find. Your inter plus ours is a slippery slope. It's equally as unlimited because you justify every non-topical affirmative saying that. No reasonability either. Chaos make the topic and reasonable competing interpretations. Most fair. No transparency. Just said you make the game less opaque for yourself. Chaos only have to prepare for 2 arguments. They block up those arguments until the 2 are right. Transparency is good, then chaos are bad. No fugitivity. Just said 1, cross-play fairness good for black people. 2, switch sides solves are offense better. K's on the next. 0, prepared act teams in direction that encapsulates more of their offense without raising the research burden. Solves both access to the fugitivity literature and arguments that reading on the app's key because teams will slowly trend in that direction in a predictable way. 3rd, black people cutting cards isn't unique to our inter, but obviously you have cards in the one I see that you cut. That doesn't make you a machine. Cedarstrom says it's a structural exclusion, one that's isolated from the ballot. Resource disparities are inevitable and unsolvable by window off, but the judge can strive for procedural fairness by putting teams to imbalance debates. Second, their inter is worse. Well-resourced schools take advantage of an unlimited topic, breaking new, unpredictable apps every round that are unchecked by topicality. Third, it turns debate into an oppression Olympics, tweaking the rules of the game to artificially advantage teams with less resources, involves in comparing marginalized races, genders, and socioeconomic statuses, which is bad for debate is different. Cedarstrom is true in the context of a global pandemic, which is what it's about. Black communities don't choose to participate in COVID. By entering the ground, you voluntarily agree to the rules established by the game. K-debaters continue to do K-debate. 1, competing interps. The judge should vote for the best vision of debate, whether or not that vision is actualizable. Second, it's relevant. Voting next solves in-round fairness loss. Third, it proves our defense. Voting for topicality will not deter them or any other team from reading apps like this in the future. 4, the game solves. If Berkeley Prep lose their next 20 debates on framework, they'll make their app more engageable or focus more of this literature on the neg. Fairness is not anti-black. When this round proves you expect the judge to properly flow and expect speech times to be tier to which the overview. Second, fairness is anti-black. The entire reason we're segregation and racism were bad is because they were unfair. Making the world a more fair place would result in a more equitable distribution of resources and eliminating white privilege. Now, case. The tie vote card was dropped. No new one error. It's just because block decisions depend on 2 AC mistakes. Calling for deference, marginalized groups are voting for black people breaking the rules. Serves elite capture by directing the attention away from the social systems that we actually change. Misrepresenting conflict like failures to center the right topics. Advocate responsibility by placing short-term psychological wounds as a priority while undermining real epistemic goals that can actually achieve the impact that they want to. Okay, good for prospects.
Alright. You good?
Mm-hmm.
How does voting neg resolve procedural unfairness?
So at the beginning of the year, we were told by the top committee that our debates this year on the neg would be about the United States federal government substantially increasing protection of water resources in the United States. So then we took that resolution and essentially we went into the internet and camps, etc., expecting disads, counterplans, etc., that compete off of that resolution.
Why is that
so
true?
That's good because if the negative is allowed to prepare, if the negative has a role in the debate to be able to engage with affirmative literature and actually have things to say, then it allows for a 50-50 equitable distribution
of how. Always inevitably has something to say.
But that's just like objectively not true. Like all the arguments, all the arguments that we prepped at the beginning of the year, like BizCon or EPA or federalism or states or politics, etc., all of those wouldn't link to your app.
Why are those valuable debates?
So we don't think necessarily that the content of those arguments are valuable, but rather, can I finish?
It's like you might win that fairness in class, or
yeah,
uniquely good. But
we're not going
fairness. I don't care. Like, why are debates over those things good, right? Like, in a vacuum, maybe fairness is great, but if you don't win that the content you're debating over is valuable, how do you win
I
that
disagree
those
with that. Like, we all come to this room expecting a debate where judges flow fairly, right? So when we make an argument, or you make an argument,
between like judges like just like deciding to flow like fairly and like the types of debates we have.
Why?
I'm asking you, what do you mean why?
well, because the point of fairness, the point of judges evaluating
Our
the flow
argument is not
fairly.
that fairness is bad. Our argument is that the way you've couched fairness is anti-black. So I'm confused. Also, given
You can't just like be selective about which fairness is good or which fairness is bad because it's self-serving. Like there are things like speech times. Like why wouldn't black team be able to go over the speech time if that allows them to talk more about their advocacy?
So
But clearly, if you adhere to certain
all right,
norms in advocacy,
let's go to
and
the
rules
weakest.
that are good for
Let's go to the
fairness.
weakest part of the 2NC, which is a question that you still haven't answered.
Sure.
Right? Let's say, assuming voting negative provides a possibility for interpretation of debate that allows for stable negative ground,
Okay.
refutation, etc.
The
Why-
chaos inevitable argument.
No.
Like
Why is refutation over the process counterplan, the Biscon dissad?
that's
uniquely
what we've been
valuable?
talking about this entire debate.
No,
It's not
no.
necessarily about like talking about like artificial intelligence taking over the world or like infrastructure collapsing or like B3 solving climate is necessarily a good topic to debate about, but those topics do provide us with adequate ground so that we have something to
But
say
why is
against
that?
affirmatives.
Yeah, why is having something to say against
Because-
affirmatives valuable?
Because fairness is good.
Why is it uniquely good?
Because it allows, okay, we've agreed both that fairness is good, right? Like, by depending on the judge to fairly evaluate the flow.
I firmly, disagree with, like, the way you've couched procedural fairness. I'm asking you a question at the level of content.
Yeah.
Procedure is your internal link to content. Let's couch it in policy terms.
Sure.
Procedure is the way you reach a form of education, form of debate. Why
Okay.
is that form of debate valuable? If you cannot win that
Because
form
it's
of
a
debate-
fair form of debate. It's a predictable form of debate.
Okay. Please.
I'm sorry, I was not paying attention.
K case.
Doc, please just drop this.
Discord, yeah, I got you. 1 second. Okay, Sean.
Never mind.
Okay.
Damn it. This is the only email I've got.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stories don't have bounds. Just do stuff.
Anyone not?
I just got it in 10 seconds.
Right.
You said K and then case.
Capitalism is always the case. One is scope. Capitalism is universalizing our project, examining accumulation and finite global cause extinction due to overshoot and affects the whole world through the process of global plunder and balances. Rob Stone's two is materiality, the material allocation of power and resources shapes people's lives and perception, other self-interest, and how they go about making decisions. That comes first. Abstract theorization of subjective resistance ignores the material way in which people's agency is circumscribed by. Capitalism specifically true of racial violence. Stevenson in 17 Solidarity's unimaginable struggle of futile problem. Racism wasn't. Ontology was the politics of plus in class antagonism. White politics is only. Roman insofar as it rose the white consciousness. He said futility cannot because you can't take out solidarity across the identity. The problem is that capitalist enterprise cannot be reduced to the racist original sin because he fails to consider the material resistance codes idealized racism, but for workers, racism is back from the boss. For poor, black people, racism is the course of water pipes. All these things are necessary to life for the racial racism. Notice racist realities are not separable from class and the tragedy social race that's where struggle not them demobilizing metaphysical maximum solidarity from below is worth it more than acknowledgments from release of solidarity is the foundation of transformation. The framework argument our interpretation is that they must disprove their capitalist justifications to weigh their advocacy. No plan means no perm. Competition theory drives them to negative social burden to make arguments that there's a disadvantage of the plan given they don't have a plan. There's no such social burden. They have simply made an observation about the world and express an opinion about any counter performance is competitive. The sense of sustained only. The offense was booting the app, which proves our fairness. Offense means it's double speak for that's unfair, which is our impacts their offense. That we don't move the app. You can get a perm if you read a plan, but you didn't, so you don't get one framework approves everything a plan increases clash firms. The key to clash firm do each is essentially firm to both. That'll be below, but winning a link proves that it's mutually exclusive and you cannot do each independently. There is no link turn the Winston evidence about maroonage is a wrong response to capitalism. Merely seeking refuge is nothing to challenge capitalism. Fugitivities defeats them, and race can explain capitalism. Limited 20 to self-politically charged history you come from. Politics of now bitter conversation discourage hope from the civil rights victories. Racial capitalism has always been reconstituted with reform must be ready now no more. Match democratic politics necessary and pure, capable of no more than partial victories, but deflated in progress in ways to defeat them is abstract economics of tools. It would be a shame not to have capitalism explain racism, Harari 15 every argues about its fictional origins, how considered part of imagination lesson, norms that you cast and reflects the chance of development that similar in America, Africa was close, so it's cheaper to import slaves from Senegal. In Vietnam and Africa, there existed slave trade to the east in Europe. Slavery was very so it was easier to buy slaves in the existing market. America was plagued by malaria, which Africans acquired immunity, whereas Europeans that died due to these facts. America was divided into whites and blacks, and were oppressed. Justified division, they continued long after the division that created slavery disappeared. Separation was maintained by legislation and customs, hence all jobs were held by whites, beginning easier that blacks were inferior as they back same degree they were transcended in code state the or such go from millennia professional the hierarchy that from change to historical occurrence supported by misspeaking only understand phenomenon by studying circumstances that transformed imaginary into structures. Now the all is not racially violent, that'll be below. The relationality is not a good starting point if your focus is on identity instead of class. That'll be below. The permutation, 1, they don't get 1. That was the framework arguments. 2 is mutually exclusive. You cannot do maroonage and a working class revolution. There are 2 different movements, and your time obviously cannot be split out. This splitter would fragment the movements and cause internal divisions, which prevents it from mobilizing being successful. Their entire K disagrees with the entire 1AC, so they cannot be done together. 3, the links are disad. First, refusal is not the same as precondition, it's the opposite because it doesn't posit any goal to plan or program it, or the refuse becomes that seeds of political ensures that the black interest will not be represented in politics. Is literally impossible to conceive how the Aff projects makes sense once the norms that they try to tear down are actually torn out, which is why the 1C's politics is fundamentally reactive and gets co-opted by white people, and it doesn't solve anything. Second is Brown evidence that basic assumptions about the fair political engagement creates a self-fulfilling prophecies by conflating the horizon of politics, which displaces the racial world of transformation desires in favor of ineffective feel-good tactics, which creates a perverse repetition that inevitably invests us in a favor of political activists and leaves us incapable of formally truly egalitarian social formations. What the alternative definitely solves now. Their K of extinction is nonsense. Extinction must come first. If magnitude is probability, if risk is magnitude times probability, then extinction will always outweigh the scope and preventable suffering is irreversible. It's not all lives matter logic because if that's oppositional and does Black Lives Matter, our argument is that extinction would hurt black people too, and we made arguments about why capitalism explains here this stuff. They say it doesn't solve racial violence. You read multiple cards that capitalism explains it, and if the alternative way, if we win the alternative rate challenges capitalism, then it solves it. They say racial ecology. The card does not say causes extinction. That's complete BS. They say K solves it doesn't. That was all the links above. Now the alternative solves its inclusive class identity that recognizes an injury points to injury to all. We are all workers, so we can mobilize together to go against capitalism. The group there dissents about it being bad in inner coalitions being bad. Johnson and 16 as view that emphasizes racial conflicts of primary can lead to feudalistic use of possibilities in a racial organization fought to secure freedom. Struggles expand labor rights that involve inequality, drew together the diverse and public sector, creating a concrete social justice, reach elements of analysis and change world that were anti-black racism is not the principle determinant of material conditions, only movements organized against these differences around a common verdict in society, lurch towards equality.
Alright, 10, running. Yeah. Was there anything else? Has the game started?
The KU game has tipped. I think we're actually at the first media timeout.
What's the
Yeah.
score?
KU 9, Texas 8.
Nice.
And they are, looks like at the first media timeout. So, we'll see.
They're favored, aren't they?
Marginally. I mean, I guess we are, ESPN gives us like a 73% winning probability going into the game or whatever. But
They're seeded way higher than that.
yeah, KU is 6 and Texas is 21. But I think the important factors are for KU, it's senior day, so like they're going to be charged up to go out on a win. And if we win, we are Big 12 champions. And for Texas, they can get the season sweep of KU because Texas beat KU in Austin, and they could deny us the Big 12 championship. So sometimes I think those things matter more, like where you played for
Yeah.
on that particular day.
Would y'all be second?
Yeah, if we lose today, then Baylor gets the Big 12 title and we are second. Unless we lose and Baylor loses, in which case we would still get it.
Who are they playing?
Baylor?
Yeah.
I don't actually know.
The Iowa State Cyclones, it looks like.
Yeah, they're in Waco though, so I think that
It's okay, we're at the field house.
matters a lot. Yeah. I am.
You're gonna be so sad if we lose.
That's why we talked about not putting that kind of energy out there in the world. Just refuse to acknowledge it until it happens. Works really well for people in charge of things. They do it all the time. Just don't talk about a problem until it happens. No downside.
It's going great world right now.
Okay. KCK.
What was he like?
Case TK.
Okay, I just heard case K, I wasn't sure what it was.
Would be a bold order.
I was like, maybe I missed something that the 2AC.
You haven't heard of the Aff team splitting the rebuttal?
That would be a broken rule.
Yeah, we kicked T for you.
Some good one ever.
Okay. Let me look myself up. You're not good?
You were good.
True show force of water governments got banned by colonial landscapes or replicated system racially good that never protect black waters, and that's something clear milligram resources participation lodging master recruit the police surveillance and cultural control that make it try to these conceded 3 impacts slow death eco managers and flexibilities that way link turn their office eco managers tendency view capital synergy accumulation to logics of management and control the alters and solve or change mindsets and fungibility which can't be explained, which means the app is a prerequisite in sequencing issue. Also the space they want to maximize on T in the clash that they sustain even if fairness is good is unethical and predeterminable impacts of unethical advocates fugitivities necessary epistemic rupture local water relationize mythologies over no space desire for the aspirations of rival geographies that produce alternate ways of knowing and New Zealand is contained in black mobility. T the role of judges to affirm future space education and prioritize black safety and category analysis of the space in which is a necessary shift given that anti-black climate debate the role of they say the role of judges just for the debate it's arbitrary not a measure for volume who did the better rating in the first place. Anyways, when we critique fairness in the way in which is valued in the first place, telling us to read the app and lose the debate is a procedure to a procedure is what is deployed in these back ways improves their framework not topicality because their regulators stylistic choices when you see the evidence that's outweighs because they conceded their own evidence says that you must make an ethical individual decision on how you interact with those things in the first place. Filter the flow through the framing debate of debate is ecology that values predictability community strength the forefront relationality through the prediction of minority participants that which outweighs and turns all our offense because it's about creating ethical entities how we research in class that predetermines the ability for safe pro-black debates and how ground is filtered in the first place. There drop notion that fairness predictability ground as assumed blackness has an afforded rest across the 2 decades is a violent mythology that always recreates blackness as a deviant into order scholarly consideration that participation success outweighs and perceives their offense not just participation participation of the black success, which is an anecdotal, and you evaluate through trends. What's the benefit of preserving activity? You want to solve the difference in half of its space. As we see mirage evidence, the refutation their interp doesn't solve it. They don't solve already infinite ground on this topic when they are abused by big teams that spam tiny water protection assets, searches, healthy units, and process counterparts. Don't solve. They have so much ground case lower recognition for this paragraphing story member case, including starting places like Africa's caps like Ujalis, which is the same 2 decades of class proofs there. They don't have to negate our identities by even if they do. One is non-unique critical participants already here. Second is no like most abstract claims. Second is bi-direction defending USCG's identity politics. Their claim is right. They're most pathological patriotic debaters in the first place. Shifty units there. Those AFs above are already more shifty, like fucking Maori, Columbia River Treaty, which obviously aren't bad, but we are locked to the discussion of water protection and its discussion in the context of the topic, which is core of the controversy, and it proves that we create desirable debate. Their process counterparts of politics isn't good. The predictability stuff, chaos, and inevitable through interpretation that God doesn't solve. They assume that impacts are minimize the impacts. 2 decades of case proof framework is failed to correctly measure. They only deputize you to the prospect of loss of fairness, but haven't articulated what that loss of fairness is in the first place. They foreclosed critical information in favor of policies in the first place, which is obviously bad and trades off with questioning economic tendencies in both sides of the debate. Natural limits, solve predictability. There's natural limit to critical literature relevant around water in the first place, which means it's reasonably topical. The debate does shape some activities, blaming other people like friends or family, and how you encounter differences in space bond, because allows debaters to shift the blame from something problematic they did to others, which obviously sustains microbial environments and pathology in this space. Also, there's no there also defense, even if other things do shape something. You have a specific engagement with the act creates a frame for reference. Also, the balance incentivizes the things you research and to orient yourselves to holding things accountable. Empirical examples like Louisville and Rutgers prove that we can change space in the debate. The suicide debate, critical affirmation is key to normative encounters rather than waiting for the encounter to happen. Create static nor forms of buying flock solely to one side of the debate, which is the form of management. We critique the false promise pattern and masking just claim durable fiat infinite magnitude impacts that always dispel back social discussions. Newman Evans sidelines debates about debate through prosecuting politics with close intimacy. Also, it's not religion under model, which isn't in man's state, but literally pretending to be a side. Third is it proves that placing focus on political issues with black radical traditions is good when we do in the first place. Fairness, heterosexual evidence is really good. Blocks is not responsive to impact. Turn to the internal link to equitability that presumes a neutral states the center on the procedural terms that condition anti-banks through codifying racial education is not value, which creates white hegemony that allows them to cipher through what they presume is for engagement, creates a logic that anti-banks is deviant, that unique operating anti-bank who is generate the generates actual impact of racial assignment. They don't. It says it doesn't assume debate. It's the context of procedural response to COVID, which is the same procedures they are describing. It's not inevitable, not solely isolated ballot. It can shift our understanding the way in which procedures are oriented towards the ballot. In the first place, the ballot doesn't have to solve all structural unfairness, but can signal the desirability of the PAM, the Taiwo evidence. We are indifferent, but active forms of resistance. Anyways, the fairness that they say we rely on it is what we're impact turning in the way in which it's enforced. The critique at the top, you are interpreting you weigh the AF and the permanent, which means that they don't get extinction outweighs when debates center on black sociality. What we do in the face of pathological resurgence, which means that extinction outweighs person doesn't work. Make them explain exactly how capital accumulation counters cascade alienation, fungibility backs paradise the geographical zones of Earth, and how it's not explaining why specific places are expropriated or why those are always black places. They can't explain why we can explain why econometricalism and management and control fungibility backs characterize capitalist accumulation dispossession. They can't explain why slaves were jumped overboard the zone. Yes, perms and meth debates for black bears. Also, it's most revealed through parent revolution strategy. Most educational perms solves the social evidence is really good in times of black radical planning. Fugitivity is a form of deconstructing racial hierarchies. The co-option, the two as the alt that make this no game. First is monetization. The assumption of race focus and class focus must remain distinct for actual party anyways, and creates a division of black radical planning. It's obviously bad and turns the link. Second is accountability of your hierarchy structures. Also sideline discussion of racial bound chauvinism proven by things like the PSL in the past.
Okay, 17, cool. Yeah, that's a pack space. I'm returning this Amazon. I'm getting my sad track back. This is unworkable. I used to have this thing that like attached to the magnets on the back of my computer. It was way easier to use than this, but it's also a little glitchy, so that's why.
What was it? Screen?
Yeah, it was like a screen in the back of the computer, and it would just like slide out, kind of. Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, T, you're not ready.
Is there a factor over here at the top or no?
There is.
So that's gonna create some problems here.
Bird prep is good.
Okay. You're not good. You can't go for an impact turn to fairness when you've conceded all the defense to your offense. Fairness comes before every impact in the one or every action we take for debate, researching, preparing, practicing, doing line-by-line answering warrants, all separate competitive drives, and the goal about an unfair debate subverts competition and the integrity of the judge. Fairness must be an intrinsic good, because if it wasn't, a judge fairly evaluating arguments would be useless. Debates rounds would be analogous having conversation about the sky being glued outside of this round. Each 2 hour will be a massive warrant about why fairness doesn't matter, because it doesn't result in debating over valuable things. If we win our defense subjectivity, this is irrelevant because none of the arguments we read are necessarily valuable. In other words, all the arguments we read are equally unvaluable because what we say in the debate doesn't inform the way we think. We consider that a loss of fairness turns their offense 3 warrants. 1, automatically giving black people valid grades, the rules of the activity, and as a form of free handouts, it makes the activity useless. The debate is a good safe space, and they actively disintegrate that safe space by making people quit because every team goes 3-3 at every tournament, but they can't prepare for asks. 2, giving black people the vows as a veneer of solving their offense while actually just giving into elite capture, which makes racism worse. As the title card that was on case. 3rd, it forces the negative into positions that are even more violent. If they're right that reading arguments like this, calling the state's counterclaim are dangerous endorsements of the state, the app makes it worse when next teams have resulted generics like racism bad against uncontroversial asks. That was dropped. The 1AR says the role of the judge to black is to improve black life in the space. They've conceded our answers. The ballot can never be a sustainable method of creating safe space if 2 black teams enter around and both need the ballot to live and breathe. The debate becomes unsafe for one of them as they fight other ballots since there are no double wins on tap. What if the one of the 2 are pivots and says it's not just about the ballot, about reading and accessing your literature? Then our interrupt solves because you can still read this app that was dropped. We just don't think you should get the ballot for reading. There was no explanation of the 1AR for why the ballot specifically is key, only about the kinds of arguments we read and their value, which was answered. Now the ecology interrupt more conceded arguments to concede 1. Debate is not ecological, it's mechanical and driven by rules and norms which above. The entire point of negating is opposition, not agreeing, and not agreeing. 22, their card is out of context about universities failing to combat racist posts on Facebook. Obviously, we don't require apps to be racist or post racist memes or tokenize black people. We just think that they should adhere to the resolution. 24, switch side was dropped. We don't think that T doesn't exclude content from debate, but rather where that content belongs. So you can still read it in one of these, but you can steer affirmatives towards a literature they want a particular way. That was dropped. It doesn't wait for the encounter to happen because they're on the neg and tell apps which specific things to read. They've also dropped the TPA that was under the colonial desire subpoint. It solves their offensive mercury evidence that says that the EPA refused demands to eliminate pollution, but the calling on the USFG to increase the protections on pollution, regulations on pollution, tells them to take action, which their card says is good. They said the only reason why the state is bad is because they didn't take the chill action, but only recognize the problem. But obviously plans solved. They've conceded internal length of fairness. That means they can't cover any arguments that policy topics worse for limits because they've conceded theirs is a worse version of debate. I'll go for the first and third internal links. 1 is reputation. Truisms like racism good are uncontestable. That turns their impact those above. 3rd is predictability. We were given a resolution at the beginning of the year, and our definitions in the 1 and 2 were dropped and formed the way how we see the resolution. They violated those definitions, which means that we win an impact of fairness and you automatically vote neg. They say our terms is worse because policy apps are more shifty. That's wrong. We still get grounds like BizCon, EPA, federalism, states, politics, etc. And the apps don't have real advantages, which means you can just beat them with any risk of dissent. Now the black participation arguments, 1, they're unwarranted. This was dropped. There's all anecdotal evidence about black participation declining. If you don't get stats in the 2AR or the 1AR, then you can evaluate it. 2nd, spurious correlation. They're just asserting that black participation is going down because they're reading T, but for all we know, it could be because they're hitting calves that they don't have preparation for, and that's why they're quitting. And black teams breaking the rules is worse. 1, they have to be neg 2, that was above. It means that they wouldn't have anything to prepare for because they depend on the resolution just like we did to decide which arguments to read. 3rd, it's counterproductive if black people winning and having success is good, then we should just give them trophies, but that eliminates the value from the activity, which causes them to quit. No natural limits. The 1A publicly listed a bunch of ground without explaining how that ground classing out and why those are predictable points of research based on the res, even if the literature has been around for years. KR still need to read specific links, which they can't access because of there's no interpretation. Now the answer is structural unfairness. We're dropped when it's isolated from the valid voting app will not remedy differences in resources and skill, but your valid can't resolve with your argument. Second, their argument is worse. It's essentially the small schools just had big schools weaponize their model of debate to break new every round and further exacerbate structural disparities. That was dropped. The ballot does solve our offensive LAT like a procedural argument that actions does something that has broken the rules, and you would remedy that by voting neg. Chaos high now is not just for offense. You're voting for the best model of debate, irrespective of the current state of debate. If you win that they've rejected the fairness norms of this debate, then you can obviously solve that in this round by voting neg. These specific warrants of the subjectivity defense were conceded, dropping one, which the 1AR did all of them, takes out all their offense was predicated on the fact that what we read in a round affects or does not affect our ethical orientation. 2 and C2 is which had to be debated against arguments we read, which proves that the arguments we read on the app aren't necessarily indicative of what we believe. 2 and C3 is lying. People read warm and good, which is verifiably incorrect, and they know it's incorrect, which proves that even teams will read arguments that they don't believe in. 4 is several rounds. There are multiple interpretations of the topic that several camps are purporting, which means that your interpretation of the topic can never be the accepted one, because even if framework is bad, then the other interpretations would be accepted. 2 and C6 is block upgrades. If we lose, we won't change our worldview or upgrade or change the arguments we read, but rather just upgrade our framework blocks, which proves no subjectivity shift. Just more power.
What time do you have left?
4:30. Oh, 4:45. All right, we're in there. Case D. Does anyone? Okay.
Do not let the negative reduce this debate to procedural question, even if they would high risk that the app makes debate unfair and lacks detestable stasis. We are waiting that colonial desires to exploit black spaces have created value systems that pathologize black spaces that are a result of the centralization of state-based solutions and discussion, which acts as the mode of co-option for environmental justice, which isn't a vague explanation, but an impact that was in the one area to the content that they say their fairness leads to, because these processes attempt to cohere all black problems back to the state, which forces all black life to be lived, and through the regime and institutional recognition has empirically failed. We are ahead on the card quantity and quality, because only our evidence in the context of institutions failing for fugitivity, specifically those McCreary really good evidence. Their only response is a TBS argument, which isn't explained well in the 2NR, and the drop doesn't even meet their own interpretation, because the demand doesn't constitute the actual embodiment of the USFG argument. Is that the starting point of USFG is ultimately anti-black framing issue. They still haven't won their fair debates are viable, which turns out procedure before case arguments, because case and impact under the debates they know what they want, and they have no defense of the content of the debate defended by their procedure, which outweighs, because even if their model gets to those predictable debates and has some sort of reciprocal clash and beneficial, predictable debates, if they aren't good, then there's no intrinsic value to them. That you must ask yourself this question before voting negative. Even if their model can preserve predictable debates, why are those debates good? Given that we have a litany of impact terms and a litany of impact terms to the content and a lack of defense that they have to this argument, means your impact out should flip at, because fairness, although described as an impact, is an internal link to a specific form of discussions which they haven't isolated as necessarily valuable. Now we'll go to the T debate proper. You're probably more inclined to vote negative given the nature of the excellency of the 2NR's description of fairness. However, even if their technical efficiency and impact calculus is excellent, they lack clear judgment structure for evaluation, which only we provide. They drop that their old arrow from role the judges A, self-serving, and people aggressive and lacks explanation. There's no explanation for why better debating that means externally. They also haven't extended it in the 2R, which means the only role of the judge that you have to defer to is ours. The role of the judge is for future space of education and future politics. It's essential for black survivability of the debate space. It's political recognition of the importance of protecting black students and community members. This must be an intentional politic that your thought affirms an ethical recognition of violence black students experience in this space, and need for it to be just via the future practice of the affirmative dominance of your subject modes of behavior, like fear, particularly in class, or indebted to racial exclusion. Black future counter spaces are essential in the anti-black climate of debate. This resolves the immediate violence and pathology black students experience in this space. Use an educator to address the ethical obligation to protect and proliferate black counter spaces inside of agency, not just for the fairness of black systems, but recognition of the value of black social and critical education, which I'll do later. Their only applicable response to this argument that you cannot create those counter spaces. The argument is not that you have to, but that you should recognize that they exist in the debate space, and why that they are valuable in the first place. If we win the role of judge, that drastically changes what you evaluate the purpose of debate is, because it means that subject formation and critical education around the cultural practice of black is uniquely good and outweighs all their insulated impacts, which means you vote after reasonability external to the competing interests of debate. Debate is not called you to argue about the purpose of debate. Debate's purpose is to increase awareness about the present practice and allow people to connect their personal space to structural bonds and configure a community-based strategy to resolve those arguments. Skills in class to produce ecological readings and res. Their purpose of debate is to assume every debate becomes a policymaker, which only becomes a minute portion of this community. Therefore, skills in class and space should produce ecological readings of debate that can be useful for debaters regardless of their career choice. This outweighs their offense. Only our education is universal because it assumes external value to the education we garner, education in class we garner in the space which they lack. That was a framing issue on case B. Terms of procedure comes first, because the debate evidence to a C sense, even if the rules are innately normative and valuable, they are deployed in anti-black ways that which proves them ranking them as good. The suicide debate it won, it wasn't dropped. It won. Affirmation is key to rupture normative encounter rather than waiting for that encounter to happen. For instance, static form of blackness that they dropped belongs to solely one set of debate. Seconds, they dropped the false promise paradigm. Ask teachers claim durable fiat when we're negative infinite magnitude impacts that are always used to dispel black discussions. They'll always go for a framework anyways. They'll tell us to write the framing issues, that they'll tell us to read on the neg just so when we're the neg, they'll tell us to not read it at all. TVA wasn't explained, and they can't win on it, and it wasn't even extended, but they dropped at least a liberal recognition, even if they aspire action, because this is technical government conception designed to maintain captivity of black imagination. Yes, debate does shape sensitivities, and the ballot plate doesn't solve one. They're not responding to the USRB evidence that literally says the ballot influences research practice, source inclusivity, cause reflection of players, and systemic environmental hostile systems. They're primarily proven by things like Louisville records and future representation. Also, we don't need stats to provide clear community trends, and also those examples of range of debates is shape sensitivities, offense, blaming. They dropped the blaming alternate other people, families, friends, and other alternative causes for hiding counter difference in the space is violent, because it allows debaters to shift the blame from something problematic that is how others have shaped and reproduced the subject advocacy, which is networks. Also, they dropped in the competitive space of debate on subject formation, evaluating subject formation, even if it's not possible, it's uniquely good. Like people like David Lobby's and career picks who organize education and protest. Next is defense, even if other things shape sensitivity, specifically engaging the application frame of reference allows you to analyze the world around you. Next is the impact of competing interpretation debate, the proper. They have conceded
inevitability, thesis of nature, critical arguments, and debate. Even if people's on procedural unfairness here now one, they haven't proved wise by. Second, there's nothing negative to because change the precedent of critical argumentation, which is substantiated by the concept of the absence of interplay refusal, falls into fugitivity as a politics of mobility, allows for blacks to sit and figuratively seal modes of imagining. They drop that they don't solve for competing imperatives. Already, if the afterwards on top of their abuse by basic dispense, like water perceptions on random islands in US birds, the skirt decide the uniqueness and process competence doesn't solve. If we really can't answer, never ever lose resolution of this debate leads to not valid 1% of this ask. Even if the 2 hours of struggle receive internal links and the impacts, they have no way to solve them. 1% of the ask solving impacts is suffice for an affirmative ballot. Next is deputization. There's a pathology officer attempted to preserve a traditional stasis which side for the purpose of liberal education is rich has been preserved white hegemony. That's ultimately anti-black that assumes a one-to-one correlation between the removal of black scholars and the production of a better space. Black success at an all-time low is a uniqueness argument that proves you should invest our role to judge because we're winning a unique position on during the black students. It's not black participation, but black success, which is proven by there only being one black debater in this round robin. That you have an argument obligation to protect given the lack of racial diversity, not only debate large, but at this term specifically, which increases the war for white and orient ballots as a future policy center for black survival in this space. They have no extended role of the judge, which means even if they win the technical concessions at the level of the page, you should default to our Aff framing. We have card evidence on the role of the judge. They don't. Good day.
Cabello. Our next round's like 20 minutes.
Is that?
No, yeah, it wasn't.
Do you have room more?
Are we supposed to do something with this?
Do we?
Alright, so we do that one.
Probably could, yeah.
Does that even know how to stop?
Oh yeah. What's that?
The street.
Oh. You got it back?
I'm not gonna.
Original software.
Just if I want somebody to break something, it might as well be, it's your stuff.
Shannon, this is a you thing.
Hey, real quick, I want to be official and do a scoreboard check. Nobody believes that they made a basketball reference that I reward speaker points for, like I said before the debate, right? This is your chance to say, no, don't forget that there was a subtle nod at something. Real good debate, y'all. Thank you.